nice to have a small group where we can all just kind of harmonize our vibrations. And so in order to start, let's do, even though we did an opening meditation, we've had a few people join us, so let's do just a very short exercise, sort of meditation. What I'm going to do is sound the Tibetan bowl 3 times. If you happen to know the Gayatri, we'll chant the Gayatri. If you don't, that's fine, just listen. And then after a couple of minutes of silence, I will sound it 3 times. Then everyone please sound the Om together if you feel so inclined. Just start off. Together. The power of sound. Is everyone here a member of the Theosophical Society? Also, raise your hand if you're a member of the society. All right, we have a few visitors. That's good. I assume that everyone knows a little bit about the society. Some of you have been here for many, many years, longer than I have. It's been a member for 53 years. And other people probably more. I'll give you just a short background about Paul and I and our involvement in Theosophy. I am a relative newcomer. I discovered Theosophy in 1975. While I was in a metaphysical bookstore, I found a copy of Leadbeater's book, Masters in the Path. Now, backing up a little bit, a few years earlier, at the age of 19, I went on a mission for the Mormon Church for 2 years. And I decided when I got back that just wasn't doing it for me. I knew there was something more somewhere. It had to be out there somewhere. So immediately after I finished, and I went to France and Switzerland on the mission, I came back and I started searching, not every day, but I just kind of had in the back of my mind, it's out there somewhere, it will appear one day. And it took about 5 years, and all of a sudden one day I took this book off the shelf, I read the first chapter, and I got a shiver down my spine. I said, that's what I've been looking for, that's it. And ever since that day, I've never looked back. I've never had any doubt about the fact that that is what I was searching for. So I have spent my time since then. Of course, I had to earn a living and have all the karmic experiences that most people do in life. But in the back of my mind, it was always the theosophical study and understanding that comes from theosophy, which is just the most recent iteration of what we call the ancient wisdom. And that was always my primary interest from that moment on. So now that I'm recently retired, I have a little bit more time to devote to sharing what I've been able to glean with other people. Paul is even more recent. He probably discovered theosophy about 5 years ago by attending a class that I was giving on John Algio's book, basically the introductory guide to theosophy. And last year he actually taught the same class himself. So he picked it up very quickly. I'm kind of a slow learner. He learns it much more quickly. He obviously has more lifetimes in the past where he already knew it. It's very much second nature for him. So one thing after we kind of found each other again in this lifetime, because we are quite certain that we've studied together in other lifetimes, more than just one. Once we found each other in this lifetime, we realized that we kind of have a joint mission in life, and that is to really learn as much as we can and share. Every one of us is both a student and a teacher. And it doesn't matter how high you get up in the chain of understanding this wisdom, you're still a student and you're still a teacher, both. And it behooves you, it is your responsibility. In fact, in the Bible, what does it say? From him to whom much is given, much is required. Not just expected, but required. It's a requirement as a member of the human race that you share what you have learned with others. Now, that's not to say that what we have learned is necessarily 100% the truth. No one that I'm aware of, and certainly not I, can ever say what I have learned is 100% true, and I will never change my mind. If you do that, then you're kind of in trouble. You've limited your ability to grow from that point on. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. Well, that's why theosophy was so appealing to me. So, no dogma. Nothing is concrete except one thing. That's the absolute, which we know nothing about. All we know is that that's where there's not even any polarity, nothing to be seen, nothing to be compared, nothing except truth itself. If there is such a thing as absolute truth, it would be at that level. But until then, we're simply ascending towards it. So the truth is, we can actually get closer to it. It's kind of like the idea of infinity in mathematics. You can never define infinity. You can only get closer to it. Or even pi. There is no absolute number that is pi. You can keep getting closer and closer and closer to it, but you'll never quite get there, ever. But you're getting more accurate. That's the point. You're getting more accurate. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about self-transformation through the science of yoga. Self-transformation through the science of yoga. How many of you have read I.K. Taimni's book, The Science of Yoga?
Long ago.
Long ago? Okay. Oh, it's fairly new. I was hoping we'd have a few people who have read it. Well, it was an easy read, wasn't it?
Hmm?
It was a pretty easy read, right? Okay, I'm being facetious. It's a wonderful book, but it is not easy to read. It's one of many, many different commentaries on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And there's some very good commentaries. I can't say that I would recommend any one particular version of it, because each person has to find one that works for him or her. So I would advise you to look around and see which, check out different ones. If you're a serious student, you may want to try to delve into Taimni's book, The Science of Yoga. And he follows the Indian tradition, where he takes the Sanskrit version written in the Devanagari script, and that's the start of each sentence or each little verse, because it's in shlokas. And then he does a kind of word-by-word literal translation, and then he does a more modern interpretation of what he feels the original author was trying to convey. Most of you know of the aphorisms, I'm sure, but let me just kind of give a quick background of them. When they were written, no one knows for sure. It could be 1,000 years ago, it could be 2,000 years ago. All we know is that they've been around for hundreds of years, and that they were written down by someone known as Patanjali. And obviously he didn't come up with all of these, but they came from teachers previous to him that had been passed down orally. But at some point the teachings were written down in concrete form in Sanskrit. And they're very concise, very short phrases. The book, if you printed it out in normal print, would probably cover 10 or 12 pages. It's only 4 chapters, and each chapter is about 50 to 55 verses, and each verse is very short and concise. A lot of information and knowledge conveyed in those very concise statements. So, our goal tonight is kind of to investigate these Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, specifically through I.K. Taimni's translation and his commentaries of them, and see what we can glean about what is yoga. What is yoga? What is the purpose of yoga? And what are we expected to learn from it? Let me talk a little bit about self-transformation and self-realization. We throw these two terms around quite a bit, and sometimes we don't really emphasize too much about thinking about what do we mean exactly. Words are our friends, and they are very treacherous at the same time. We couldn't convey information on the physical plane without words, whether they're spoken or written. But on the other hand, they don't really convey concepts very accurately. Every word we think is very precise, but it's not. I can say one word and I have certain ideas and thoughts that come whenever that word is spoken or read, and yet Lynn will see something, she'll perceive something slightly different. So we do the best we can with words, but one of the things we learn in studying theosophy and yoga is that as we rise in consciousness, our ability to convey and to glean information improves. we are able to transmit ideas on levels that transcend words even. At a certain point, there are not even any words involved. So language, we don't have to learn all these foreign languages anymore. We can transmit the actual ideas without any words, without any images. That happens at the level of the higher mental plane. I assume that all of you are familiar with the different levels of consciousness in Theosophy. Let me just go over them very quickly, and this is only one version. There are many different denominations. People use different words for it, but what I want to emphasize in general is not to get fixated on words or on a specific type way of expressing something. Get the general picture. Get that general idea first, and then fill in other parts of it whenever it becomes pertinent. A lot of times people get fixated on a particular word or a particular method or a particular school of expressing something, and then they become dogmatic about it, and everything else is a little more, is kind of thrown out the door. Self-transformation for me is simply focusing on the personality. So what do we mean by the personality? When I say the personality or the lower self, I talk about the physical body. And generally, the personality is what the average person would think of when you say me, I. Unfortunately, I don't know many names here. I know Ed and I know Lynn, but the rest of you. But when Ed says I, in general, or is talking about himself, other people perceive a certain image. They see his physical aspect. They have certain emotional aspects that are involved. They have certain thoughts. There's this kind of picture of Ed or Lynn or anyone. I am this. So it is our physical body, our emotional or astral body, as it's called sometimes, our vehicle. I prefer the term vehicle, and our concrete thoughts for the most part. Our ideas, our thinking, and the way we transmit ideas to other people. That's what I call the personality. The higher self, and in this case, we're talking about what is sometimes called sometimes the soul. We don't use that word too often in Theosophy, but I kind of like that word soul because the word ego has been used in so many different ways that it gets confusing. Some of you know that the older theosophical literature talks about ego as being the higher part of our self. It's called the individuality, it's called the causal body, it's called the higher self. But I'm going to refer to it, just to make it simple in general, as the soul or the higher self. And by the way, for those of you who know quite a bit about Theosophy, Sinnott apparently is the one who came up with that term, the higher self. It is one that is very useful. Sometimes it's self with a capital S, meaning the higher self, and a small s, meaning the personality. So the various levels we're talking about in general are physical, emotional or astral, then lower mental, the higher mental, the Buddhic plane, or intuitional, the Atmic plane. As we get higher and higher, they become more rarefied, and we kind of don't have a whole lot of ability to express much unless you're very advanced. It's conducting a class that helps people kind of get an idea of some of these, because you have to actually kind of stretch yourself to gain some kind of consciousness on those planes and to even begin to experience them. Again, we're going to talk about that in this whole idea of what can we gain through yoga. And beyond that, there are other planes of consciousness. They go on and on and on. We have some that are within our solar system, others that are cosmic in nature, that are beyond it, of which our solar system is only a part, and then they go on. People ask, when does it ever end? Never end. There's no end and again, this is what I've learned. This is how I perceive it, and I don't claim to have 100% accuracy. But this is what I've found in my experience, is that we continue to grow and expand. I mean, I can't even conceive of an end to expansion of consciousness. That would mean that it stops at some point and then doesn't go anywhere from there. So I tell people, I lay awake, don't you lay awake at night and think about these things? I sure do. I will wake up in the middle of the night and be thinking about, well, how could you expand only to a certain point and then that's it? There is no more expansion of consciousness. I actually do that. So, yeah, you've got to think, you've got to contemplate and think about these things. So, self-transformation is focusing on the personality and the fact that there's more to it than just this personality. We all know that. What there is our higher self. That's our next step, is to gain a relationship with this higher self and eventually to make that our primary focus of existence, that level of consciousness. This then becomes merely an instrument for gaining information at this level and for helping people at this level. But our true consciousness at that point is now on a higher plane. It's not here at what we call our normal, everyday level of consciousness. The average human being has that. Not everyone has consciousness at this higher plane. In fact, very, very few people, as we will see. Self-realization, with a capital S, is simply focusing on the same process, but from the opposite point of view. Focusing from the higher self and realizing that we can actually attain that level of consciousness through a strenuous effort, as we will see. So, self-transformation, self-realization is the same thing, simply viewed from two different points of view. Now, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are the basis of all yoga. Unfortunately, in the Western world, when you mention the word yoga, what do they think of?
Asanas and postures.
Yes, these things that Paul does. He's an aficionado of Hatha yoga. In fact, went to Bikram yoga today and the other day. He's very much addicted to yoga, almost now. But no, we think about Hatha yoga. And Hatha yoga, Karma yoga, Bhakti yoga, all of the different yoga schools are derivatives of this original yoga, which is written down in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and referred to as Raja Yoga, the royal yoga, the king of yogas. That was the first one. All of the others came about later, and they really are preparatory, most of them, preparatory steps to implementing the practices that Patanjali talked about. So, what is yoga? The word itself, we all know, means union. Union of what? Union of the lower self and the higher self. Gaining some kind of a channel of communication that goes both directions. There has to be a flow of some kind of communication, both up and down, if we want to use, you can't use terms, I mean, you have to use some kind of terms in order to convey information. So we, again, we use language, which is the best we have, but it doesn't accurately convey what we're trying to convey. So let's say we're conveying understanding up and down. Once we attain that, then we are able to increase that. The connection, by the way, is called antakarana. And I don't expect anyone to try to memorize all these terms. Again, remember the general concepts. There is some kind of a communication between that can be developed, let's say, because it's very potential at this point. For most people, it's not even 2 tin cans with a string as far as the communication ability. And after years of practice, it might become kind of a dial-up connection. And only after several lifetimes does it really become a T1 connection between the lower self and the higher self. This is a long-term operation. Just to be clear, we're talking about meditation. And let me insert here too that if you have any questions pertaining to what we're talking about right now, please raise them as we go. At the end of the presentation, then if you have something of a more general nature, then we'll entertain it at that point. But if there's something that isn't being answered as we go, then please chime in and say, could you clarify that a little bit? Yoga is union. The union between the lower self and the higher self. It is creating this communication via the antakarana. And now we're going to see just what can be accomplished when that actually does happen. In the Yoga Sutras, in the Science of Yoga, Taimi says, yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. The inhibition of the modifications of the mind. First, let's point out here that we have learned through theosophy that the brain and the mind are 2 different things. Science hasn't figured that out yet. They still think that the brain creates thoughts. It does, but of a primitive nature. It certainly doesn't create the higher thoughts that we humans are able to generate. And they haven't yet recognized that the true thinking comes from some other thing that we call the mind. They refer to the mind, but they interconnect the brain and the mind as if there's no difference. We know that the mind can exist without the brain. We also know that the mind, in general, cannot operate on the physical plane without some kind of a physical instrument to use. So it uses the brain during one's lifetime in order to think in the physical world. But after you die, you still have a mind. You don't have a brain, that's for sure. The brain is gone at the end of it. I mean, for some people, it's not even here anyway. But the brain is gone at the end of your life. But you still have your mind. You still exist. You still are a being. And you still have thoughts. So that is 2 different things. So keep that clear. Now, inhibition of the modifications of the mind. So this mind is able to do something. It uses mind matter, so to speak, to create something, thoughts. We call them thoughts. Sometimes they are concrete thoughts, sometimes they are abstract thoughts. But they are all thoughts. And it uses some kind of matter. Anything below the level of the absolute is matter. And it uses this matter to mold it into something that we call thoughts. And these thoughts can be transmitted. They can have energy added to them. And they have a certain power. There's an energy that is, with which it is endowed. And that has a potential to do something. It can touch something. It can affect people. That's why thoughts are so powerful. One saying that I like is that energy follows thought. You create a thought and there's energy in it, and then it attracts other energies that are similar to it. On page 36 of the Yoga Sutras, he says, the science of yoga cannot be mastered in one life. The science of yoga cannot be mastered in one life, but only in a succession of strenuous lives devoted exclusively to the yogic ideal. Those who are impatient and cannot adopt this long-term view are not yet qualified to enter the path and make steady progress towards the goal. This is a long-term commitment. We're really talking about the science of meditation. We'll get a little deeper into that as we go. And what we call meditation, everyone has their own interpretation, and we get some benefit from whatever practice we do that we call meditation. But Taimni has and Patanjali have very concise ideas about what this meditation process is. And to really master it, he says, takes a number of lifetimes and strenuous work during each of those lifetimes to make it happen. I want to quote from another book about what meditation is. And it's called The Light of the Soul. And in this book it says the goal of meditation, and this again is one other commentary on the Yoga Sutras, the goal of meditation is the ability to contact the divine inner self. And through this contact, to come to a realization of the unity of that self with all selves, and with the all self, capital A, capital S, meaning the all one, the one. And this, not just theoretically, but as a fact. In other words, it's experiential. This is not just, you actually experience this. This comes about when a state called samadhi is achieved, wherein the consciousness of the thinker is transferred out of the lower brain consciousness into that of the spiritual man or soul on its own plane. The stages of this transfer can be stated as follows, and there are 4 stages mentioned. First, the concentration of consciousness in the physical brain itself. And this is specifically in the neighborhood of the pineal gland. So the consciousness is centered first near the pineal gland, and then second, it is transferred into the mind, the lower mind. And this is undertaken via the etheric body, and specifically through the Brahmarandra, or the opening at the top of the head. So this is very specific. I don't know, I can't tell you whether or not this is accurate, but I think it's interesting to look at all of these different interpretations, and who knows, you may actually find that there's something that is useful in it. Then the next step is the transfer of consciousness from that lower mental body into that of the soul, or the higher self, so the higher mental body. Now you're really at your goal. This is your goal, to have attained that. There is then brought about a condition in which the brain, the lower mental body, and the egoic body, or higher self, higher mental body, form a coherent unit, alive, alert, positive, and steady. Alive, alert, positive, and steady. So in this meditative state, it's not kind of zoned out. It's very alert, and it's very almost a sense of expectancy. There's a tension even. And when that occurs, then the state of samadhi, or spiritual contemplation, can be entered. When the soul looks out upon its own world, sees the vision of things as they are, contacts reality and knows God. Following upon this comes the stage in which the spiritual man transmits to the brain via the mind that which is visioned. So not only does your higher self then feel the impulse to go out and collect some kind of understanding, but now it needs to come back as much as possible into this physical brain again. Otherwise, it doesn't help you as a personality. So it has to transmit to the brain via the mind that which is visioned, seen, contacted, and known. And in this way, the knowledge becomes part of the brain contents and is available for use upon the physical plane. So, very, very distinct, very concrete what this process of meditation is supposed to do. It's sounding like it's a little more difficult than what we generally think of as meditation. I wanted to read, let's see, a quote that tells us a little bit about what we can achieve when we have achieved that level of consciousness that we are able to contact our higher self. This is something that one of the Mahatmas was telling Siddhartha, trying to explain to him what the goal of self-transformation was. He said in 1881, "Believe me, there comes a moment in the life of an adept when the hardships he has passed through are 1,000-fold rewarded." So all this strenuous effort finally at some point does achieve its reward. In order to acquire further knowledge, he, the adept, has no more to go through a minute and slow process of investigation and comparison of various objects, but is accorded an instantaneous, implicit insight into every first truth. It's like you're absorbing it, like a sponge. It just comes to you. All you have to do is focus on whatever it is you're trying to understand, and it comes to you. The adept sees and feels and lives in the very source of all fundamental truth. That sounds incredible to me. Incredible. And yet that is what we're supposed to attain. I want to read also something that Taimni wrote in another book. All of his books, by the way, are really interesting and quite difficult to comprehend. It takes some dedication to get through those books and to actually delve into them to the point that you can glean some of them. But it is so worth it. If you're willing to make the effort, you will get a lot out of it. His book, The Science and Occultism, is another book that has a lot of really good. You've read that one too, okay. In the preface to the book, he mentions something about what we call initiations. This is another one of those words that we use a lot, and yet there's a lot of misunderstanding and just lack of comprehension of what it entails. And in this book, he says, there is yet another method of gaining knowledge concerning the deeper realities of existence. This is through initiation, when knowledge is imparted from one who knows and has the necessary power and authority to do so to a qualified disciple by temporarily raising the receptivity of the latter by occult methods. Now this sounds to me that he's talking from personal experience. Owing to this artificial sensitivity induced in this manner, the consciousness of the recipient is temporarily raised to a higher level and is able to perceive the particular truth as a direct experience in consciousness. Now, this, again, sounds like the same type of gleaning information.
I think we may have all had an experience somewhat similar to that idea of initiation. And initiation, as you say, is one of those words that's thrown around a lot. And I often think of Will Rogers, who said, it's amazing how much you can write with a few facts. They just get expanded. But in any case, I remember one of my mentors I mentioned to you earlier, Fritz Kuntz, who used to speak in this hall frequently. He had a powerful mind. He was dedicated to the adepts and to the theosophical philosophy and modern science. His mission in life was to justify modern science and the theosophical principles, and he achieved a lot of that. And when people were around him and he was talking, they really felt they understood what he said. And when they got out, they didn't. It was the impression of his mind on the minds of the people in the room, and they really felt they understood. But later, if you asked them, what did he say? Well, it was wonderful, but I don't know. So there, that idea of you're raised, although I don't, maybe you don't either, like those terms of up and down because they're really not true. They just have to use words, as you say. But for a moment, your mind is isomorphic with the mind of the speaker or the guru. And then when you go away, you're out of that field and you sink back. Maybe not quite as far, but you do sink back.
You're exactly right. And many of Krishnamurti's followers found the same thing. They would sit within his aura, they would listen to him speak, and they were completely caught up into a different level of understanding. And they felt that they had some kind of ability to comprehend things that they didn't have before, and yet afterwards they couldn't agree on what he had even said.
Yeah.
I went to see him one time 2 years before he died, and I know from personal experience, I sat there and I was completely caught up in his whole lecture, and afterwards I could not have told you to save my life what he actually said. But this is very true.
Could I just quickly add something about the definition of meditation? As you quite rightly point out, there are many definitions of it. Two have always been my favorites. One is HPB's definition, that meditation is the inexpressible longing of the inner self for the infinite. And the other is from Krishnaji, who said that meditation is the emptying of the mind of all thoughts of me. And that includes every thought, even theosophical thoughts. Empty. And that can be achieved in meditation. I have achieved it, millions have achieved it, and it comes to a point where when there is total emptiness in the mind and yet at the same time a focus on the eternal, there comes a point when there is no me, there is no time, there is only the eternal. And it only lasts for a nanosecond. And even the adept that from whom you quoted, when he said he lives in that realm of eternal truth, or however he phrased it, he says he can only do that when he's acting as the adept. In all other cases, he's acting as a mortal human being.
What Timothy is pointing out here is very distinct, however. It even transcends what Ed and I have been talking about here. He says this kind of sensitivity, and he's talking about where your consciousness is raised temporarily. This does not last and is not under one's control, as it has been induced temporarily by an external agency, by the descent of particular kinds of forces in the vehicles by esoteric methods. But it generally sets in motion processes which culminate in the capacity to gain these realizations voluntarily and by one's own efforts. This is really the realm of yoga. So, Tim Boyd, president of the TSA, talked about one of these experiences. One in the Quest magazine a few years ago, if you remember, and it happened right here in New York City. He was in the park by Riverside Drive, and he was young. I think he was in his 20s. He said that and I've talked to him about this, was. Between taking one step in the park and the next step, it was something occurred. Something happened that he felt he was not the same person at all. I mean, not even close. It was like his consciousness went from here to there, and just like that. And he recognized it and was stunned. And he and all other people that I know that have had this experience describe it in very similar terms. Eckhart Tolle had one like that. I know a lady in Hawaii who had one like that, and I've met a couple of other people who have had similar experiences. And it most often happens at night. They wake up the next morning. I believe that the actual initiation or the touch happens during the night. And that in some cases that person is immediately aware of it upon awakening, and that other times at some point during the day it clicks and it's like, wait a minute, I just realized I'm not the person I was yesterday. What happened? And it's this jump in consciousness. But it doesn't disappear immediately. It actually lasts for months. But it gradually declines. And most of them will say the same thing, that they kind of panic, or not panic, but they're become anxious and say, wait, I want to stay right up there where it was, but they can't do it. It's not possible because they didn't make it happen themselves. It was like, and they almost always use this term, an act of grace. Like someone touched them, gave them a little gift, said, here, let me open your sight for just a moment to see what the potential is. You have made an honest effort and you have worked strenuously for several lifetimes. Let me show you what you can achieve. This vision opens up, and it does last for quite a while. Then it gradually tapers off, and the goal for that individual is to maintain it at as high a level as possible for as long as possible, and eventually to be able to regain that on his own. But it takes time and effort. So that is, according to Taimni, what initiation actually accomplishes. It is a very specific step, and it is recognizable. In fact, there's a book written by, let's see, I forget his name, Dean, I believe is the last name, and he was a psychiatrist. He actually wrote a paper about this experience. He had collected information from enough individuals, and if anyone's interested, I can look up the reference for you. The book, unfortunately, is out of print, but the article is very interesting because it describes exactly what individuals have experienced, and it coincides so closely with this that it has to be the same thing. So that, in part, is what we are trying to accomplish through yoga, Raja Yoga, meditation. We're beginning to get an idea that it's a little more complicated, not complicated, but it requires much more effort than we ever dreamed. Let me quote one more thing from Taimni. He says that aspirants who are not familiar with the realities of yogic life plunge directly into the practice of meditation without any preparation whatsoever, and then wonder why they do not make any progress. In truth, when you start delving into this book, you realize that you can't really meditate, what he's calling meditation, until you've had a few lifetimes of preparation. There's a lot of pre-work to be done just to get up to the point to do what he calls meditation. We're going to go through the actual definition and see what he's calling meditation. But it's looking a little more daunting than it was at one time. He also says that the yogic techniques, the yogic technique has to be adopted as a whole and not piecemeal. If, for example, the ordinary desires have not been eliminated and are merely curbed, it is impossible to practice samadhi. These desires will continue to exert unconscious pressure and will throw up all kinds of images in the mind, and it will not be possible to maintain under these conditions the uninterrupted and tranquil state of the mind, in which alone samadhi can be practiced. This state cannot be brought about by the mere exertion of willpower, as some people suppose. So, rather than using your mind to try to force everything to create the conditions necessary for meditation, he's saying you have to actually transform yourself to a certain extent before meditation can even occur. There is some work, preparatory in nature, on your personal self that you can and must do before the real results of meditation can be experienced. So, what are these pre-qualifications? And you talked about Krishna in his definition of meditation. Here's a very similar one. And Taimni says the basic idea underlying the whole philosophy of yoga is the destruction of the I, capital I, consciousness. The destruction of the I consciousness. All right, let's talk about some of this work that we've got to get started on it. Truth is, all of you have already started on it. And some of you have made considerable progress in other lifetimes, in this lifetime. I try to remind people that practicing yoga, living the spiritual life, is not unlike that of an athlete in preparation for the Olympics, with one very big difference. The athlete works a certain number of hours per day, for a certain number of weeks, for a certain number of years, under the tutelage of a coach who is there every single day giving him instruction. And then at some point he competes and he either wins or doesn't win, and he either continues or loses, but it's only for a number of years. In this case, it is far longer. It's a number of lifetimes. We have to work not only a certain number of hours a day, but 24 hours a day, every single day. At least that has to be your overriding goal. It has to be more important than anything else in your life. You have to be absolutely 100% devoted to it. That doesn't mean you can't have fun and you can't live life. You know, you have your karma and you've got other things that it all takes time, but don't ever lose sight of your final goal. That's the point. And work strenuously toward it. Remember that. If you don't remember anything else tonight, remember that it requires strenuous effort over several lifetimes. And here's the other point. We don't have any coaches that are available to help you several hours a day. There are lots of people out in the world that insist that they have these guides that they can call down at any moment and they'll answer any question and tell them when bread's on sale at the store or whatever they happen to need to know. But the truth is that these teachers don't have time for that. You're lucky if you might get a little hint during meditation or during the night once in a while here and there. And whether you pick up on it or not is up to you, whether you're living the yogic life to the extent that you're capable of doing that. So let's see what HPB has to say about this. I'm going to have you read it. At the end of her life, HPB died in 1891, and in one of the drawers of her writing desk, they found this. And as far as I know, no one knew why she wrote it, if it had been shared with anyone. It certainly hadn't been published anywhere, and she always had some kind of a vehicle for publishing her writings. And there it was, and to me, it's one of the most incredible things that she ever wrote. Ed wrote a book using one of the lines from this as the title of the book, The Secret Gateway. And I get the chills when I read this, so I'm going to have Paul read it to me.
There is a road. There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lifetimes in which success may come. HPB.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so are you starting to get a picture of what's really involved? Now she's describing the yogic life, what is required. I hope that all of you are clear on what it is that your goal as an aspirant is. I like to state it very clearly as my goal is to become an adept. Very clearly. And it's not going to happen in this lifetime and not in the next lifetime, but it will happen, and I'm trying to make that as short as possible. And there's a very good reason why I think we need that to happen. There are very few adepts to help other people. I've already mentioned that they don't have the time to spend a lot of hours helping individuals, regardless of the fact that some of them could be helped with that. They are busy 24 hours a day trying to help the spiritual education of humanity. They have a tremendous amount of work that they have to accomplish. And even in the Mahatma letters, in one of the letters, K.H. said, our numbers are just now dwindling. They're not even increasing at that point. I can't tell you what's going on now, but at that point, which was around, I think, 1882 or 81, he said, our numbers are dwindling right now. That means that some of their members were having to be called off to other types of work and were no longer available to help the human evolution here on our planet. There's a desperate, desperate need for replacements and for new recruits to fill those positions. Humanity is crying for it. There are millions of people that have achieved a certain level of spiritual development in the world, but they need someone to guide them. And those leaders and those teachers are not there. It's a disconnect. We have very few up here, a lot of students and potential students, and the infrastructure and the number of teachers necessary just cannot sustain that. It's not even there. It's not even there. In the future, it will be different. But right now, it's a very difficult problem. What is required is for a few people to stand up and volunteer and say, I am willing to do whatever it takes to do that strenuous effort, lifetime after lifetime, get all of my karma out of the way so that that's my only focus in life. I'm willing to do that because I recognize that I can be one of those people who has the power to bless and save humanity. That's what's required. HPB tried to make it as plain as possible. The adepts tried this 7-year experiment, extended provisionally for 7 more years. In many ways, it was an abject failure. There had to be a certain amount of disappointment in the fact that almost every single individual that tried failed. And at the end of the period when the Mahatmas were corresponding with A.P. Sinnet, he was told, never have you actually taken the trouble to, and I'm paraphrasing, to do any type of program that would change yourself, to transform yourself. And obviously, that's what's required. We have to make it happen ourselves. They said it over and over again. No one can turn you into an adept. You make it happen. And quoted a famous Spanish poet, Machado, in his book, Caminante no hay camino. El camino se hace al andar. Pilgrim, there is no path. You make the path as you go. You create it. You make yourself into an adept by figuring out, by whatever it takes, all right, this is my goal. Let me figure out what path, what qualifications I need to develop in myself, what experience do I need in order to get from here to there. And that's exactly what it is. It is dauntless. So what are the 3 qualifications? These are very important. Dauntless courage. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. Most people don't think of spiritual development as being dangerous, but it is extremely dangerous. Physically, psychically, emotionally, and mentally. I can tell you some of the wrecks along the way. I know people who have become mentally deranged. I know one person who committed suicide, who killed his wife and committed suicide, and was a devout member of the TS. These are people who tried, but without having first established the qualifications. It is dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. So, danger, dauntless courage. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass. This is huge. There is no trial through which spotless purity cannot pass through. This spotless purity isn't composed of following a certain set of standards. It is composed of, we'll see it later, but it's composed of purifying every aspect of your lower being, purifying through the refiner's fire. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. Well, most people don't recognize that strong intellect would be a qualification to become an adept, but these individuals are the most intelligent people I know. HPB, although I didn't know her personally, but from reading what she wrote and delving into her mind through these writings, was incredibly intelligent. Yet she didn't have even a college degree. You cannot attain without a very high degree of intelligence. And that requires a lot of work to develop it if you haven't already. If you feel you are not there yet, then get to work. And I don't know how to do it. I can't tell you to follow these 3 steps. You've got to make it happen yourself. Develop the strong intellect, develop the dauntless courage, and develop the spotless purity. We're going to cover these a little bit. I recognized a few years ago that I didn't have dauntless courage. There were a few things that still kind of daunted me. So, some people are afraid of enclosed rooms. Some people are afraid of heights. Some people are afraid of, speaking in front of an audience. I found that I wasn't particularly afraid of heights, but I thought, just to test it, let me see if I'm willing to go up in a plane that works perfectly well and jump out. So I did. And it took a little bit of talking myself into it, but I did it not once but twice, and discovered, okay, I can do that, so I feel good about that. But another thing I was a little concerned with is I didn't feel real comfortable in deep water. Never felt that I could really swim very well. So I said, well, I'm going to go get certified in scuba diving. I was 50 years old, close to it. And I thought, wow, it's kind of old, but let's do it. So I went and got certified, and I was a little intimidated. I was a little nervous about it, but I did. And the certification in Las Vegas is, at the end, you are taken out to Lake Mead, where the visibility is about 18 inches, and you have to go down 30 feet and do certain, remove your mask, and then fill it with water, and then use the air in your air tank to clear it out again, and all this stuff. We went down 30 feet, and we couldn't even see our instructor. She was a few feet away, and we lost everybody. Everybody got, lost. And so we were down there, and it was a little intimidating. But anyway, the point is that I took some steps. I did whatever it took to establish whether or not I had this dauntless courage that was required. And that's the sort of thing, that's just an example. Paul did the same thing. He has had asthma ever since he was a child and was intimidated by water, so he did the same thing, completely separate. I didn't even know him at the time. He got certified in scuba diving so that he could overcome this fear of water. Didn't you?
That's true. And that's one of the reasons why I like Bikram yoga, is because it's in an enclosed room, it's very, very hot and humid, and I'm challenged to focus on my breath, and it's
All right, so let's see what some of the purification process entails. And for this, let's go back to Taimni's commentaries, where he's talking about overcoming some of the desires. He says that all aspirants who are treading the path of yoga must try to understand clearly the role which desire plays in our life and the manner in which it keeps the mind in a constant state of agitation. Desire keeps the mind in a constant state of agitation. So he's saying that this is an impediment to meditation. Let me hasten to explain that there is nothing in the universe that does not have desire. Again, words are pathetic in their ability to convey information, but we have no other choice. Everything has some form of desire, whether it's an atom, whether it's a rabbit, whether it's a geranium, or whether it's a human being, or a solar logos has to have desire, or that creature or being would do nothing. It's desire that impels us to do something. So what he's talking about specifically are the lower human desires, these emotional, ego-centered desires that we all have. I certainly haven't overcome them. I don't. If anyone here has, raise your hand, because I want to talk. Oh, Michael, okay, I want to talk. No, we all got work to do. We all have work to we all have work to do.
So Bartoli did. He has no ego.
No ego either. All right, good. All right, now, so what are the two methods of getting rid of desires and of attaining the qualifications necessary to proceed? Well, they keep coming up again and again in the Yoga Sutras. There's two words I would ask you to remember tonight, if not, well, I already asked you to remember one thing. What was that? Strenuous, how strenuous it is. Two more things to remember. Two of the qualifications are viveka and vairagya. And if you want to use English terms instead, it would be, what is it?
Viveka?
Yes.
Discernment?
Discernment. We used to use a different word, but I prefer discernment. Discernment and equanimity. Let's use those two terms. Discernment and equanimity. So, viveka, discernment. Let's see what he has to say about what viveka is. And he says that it enables the aspirant to enter the path of yoga. All right, so we at least have a beginning point here. Viveka is what's required to at least make a start. Those who come to yoga out of curiosity drop out sooner or later, unable to bear its ceaseless strain and the ruthless stripping away of the personality. Oh my gosh, which is involved. The ceaseless strain and the ruthless stripping away of the personality. Sounds like your flesh is just being stripped off your bones, doesn't it? Well, it's pretty much like that. Pretty much like that. So we have to destroy the personality, so to speak. Now, that doesn't leave a shell. I'll try to explain that later. There's a whole lot of stuff to cover in this. It is fascinating stuff. But it doesn't mean that you're left with this non-entity, with a Mr. Spock who has no connection with human beings. It means that you have someone who is exquisitely in tune with human beings. The adepts are more compassionate. They are kinder than any human being I can imagine or know personally. And yet they have achieved this. They have achieved this elimination of the personal I, of the I consciousness. And we'll see a little bit
And
later.
yet they have personalities.
They do have personalities.
So I mean, it's paradoxical.
Yes, it is.
We don't really commit suicide.
No, absolutely not. They are enormously more alive and aware and conscious than any of us are. And they experience life to a degree that we can't even imagine. They are more in tune, and the reason for that is they have to be able to be in tune with the people that they are trying to help. They have to be able to connect. And they remember all of their past lifetimes. Let me just hasten to remind us that all of us have lifetimes that we would probably never want to know about. We have all been murderers, rapists, thieves, and worse in other lifetimes. It's inevitable. We started at the very ground floor and we made huge mistakes, and we're still, many of us, making mistakes, but we've made progress. The adepts are no different. They went through the same process as we were. They understand what we've gone through. So they have enormous compassion for us. But they can't help us if they react emotionally to everything that we do. They can't help us achieve our personal goals. They don't have time for that, and it doesn't help your spiritual enlightenment. But they will help whatever possible in your true spiritual development. The main object of this relentless ethical code is to eliminate completely all mental and emotional disturbances which characterize the life of an ordinary human being. Hatred, dishonesty, deception, sensuality, possessiveness are some of the common and ingrained vices of the human race. And as long as the human being is subject to these vices in their crude or subtle forms, so long will his mind remain a prey to violent or hardly perceptible emotional disturbances which have their ultimate source in these vices. As long as these disturbances continue to affect the mind, it is useless to undertake the more systematic and advanced practice of yoga. So you don't really make any advancement to speak of until you have got some of these preliminary qualifications in place. And it's a purification process that has to take place. So what is it we're purifying? We're simply getting rid of all of the lower vibrational energy fields in our nature. That's why it is called the refiner's fire. That's why it is such a daunting operation. And it requires letting go and actively getting rid of some of the stuff that we are very much attached to. Eckhart Tolle wrote a book called A New Earth, and he kind of mentions 3 things in there, and then he doesn't flush them out very well. We actually kind of took these 3 and incorporated them in the book that we wrote and tried to bring in some theosophical ideas and show how those are the qualifications we have to develop in order to be yogis. They are non-attachment, non-reaction, and non-judgment. And those 3 really comprise Viveka and Vairagya. If you have developed those 3, non-reaction, non-judgment, and non-attachment, you're about this close to becoming an adept. You are very close. But non-attachment alone is a huge one. Non-attachment, how do we not be attached to things? Vairagya, that's another one that is hard. I think HPV gave the best definition of it. She said it's how did she say it? It's basically the non-reaction to either pleasure or pain. Neither one affects you.
Indifference?
Indifference, that's it. Indifference to pleasure or pain. So, you've all heard stories like the Chinese farmer, or I'm not going to tell you one because you will come up with one on your own. But something happens to someone and their neighbors and friends all say, oh, how lucky you are, what a wonderful thing, good karma. Maybe, maybe not. And then that turns out that it wasn't so good because that brought on something else, and then they say, oh, what terrible karma, what bad luck you have. Maybe, maybe not. And then it switches the other way. And the fact is, there is no good karma, there is no bad karma. There is only karma, and there is only news. When people say I have bad news, I say, wait, there's no bad news or good news, there's only news. And my goal is not to react to it. My goal is to accept it simply as reality. This is what happened, okay, now, is there something I need to do about it or not? If I need to do something, then let's get it done. If there's nothing to do about it, then I don't even need to know about it. There's nothing that can be done, so let it go. It's hard to do. It takes decades of strenuous effort to make that happen, and this is the type of work we have to do. It seems simple. We comprehend it mentally, but when you actually implement it in your life, it's going to be difficult. You have to remind yourself thousands of times. Every time you think you're almost there, something will happen. You're failed again. There's only one time you can ever fail. That is when you give up, when you stop trying. This work is so strenuous and so difficult that you are going to fail thousands of times. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you keep going. You don't ever, ever let it get you down. That's the only way you're going to achieve. The only time you will fail is if you say, you know what, I just can't do this. That's a failure. So, I think we have a pretty good idea of what some of the requirements are, and that's just a beginning. We've tried to include some of them in the book, and that also is just a beginning, but at least it will give you a start on what it is and Ed's book gives you excellent ideas on how to start this process of becoming the type of person who can achieve the highest level of meditation. Let's talk just for a few minutes, and I won't keep you too late. It's a cold night in New York City, and there are lots of things to do out there. Let's talk about what we call meditation and what is called meditation in the Yoga Sutras. This again is one of those things that gets a little confusing because we use the word meditation for the entire process, and yet it is also used as one part of the process. So let's just kind of try as much as possible to get that clear. In the Yoga Sutras, they call the entire process samyama, the entire process of going from wherever you happen to be to achieving the highest state of samadhi is called samyama. Now, that is composed of three different portions. The earliest portion is called dharana and is usually translated as concentration. Well, most of us can at least do that part. We can sit down quietly, choose something that we want to focus on mentally or physically, even with your eyes open, and just concentrate on it. We can at least do that part. So that is no problem. The second one, dharana. In most commentaries, they translate that as meditation. So already we have a little conflict. The whole process is called meditation, and the second step of it is called meditation. And that's a little higher level of awareness. Then we have samadhi, which again has some kind of translation into English, and that's usually called contemplation. So these three Sanskrit terms are normally translated as concentration, meditation, and then contemplation. I always found that confusing. So, being an iconoclast, I just kind of reinvented it. I said, I'm going to choose words that are more meaningful to me. So I chose out of those to call the first step concentration, which is the same. Then to call the second step contemplation, because that I can understand, and I feel like I can contemplate things. And the third step, samadhi. That's really, except for the very beginning phases of it, probably kind of beyond me. But we all have an idea that samadhi is something way up there, I think. So I call it instead concentration, contemplation, and samadhi. And you can choose your own words, or you can use the standard definitions. But get the concepts, at least generally, in your mind, so that you have your own system. And then I call the entire process meditation. So that's just my own. The practical mastery of its techniques of meditation, or samyama, opens the door not only to the knowledge of all kinds, but also to powers and superphysical accomplishments known as siddhis. The third object of this society is to understand and discover the hidden powers in the human being. And these are the siddhis that are talked about in yoga. When you achieve a degree of samadhi, these siddhis, these powers, begin developing on their own. And then, once they've developed to a certain state, you have the power to save and help humanity. That's what it's all about. If you're doing it just for your own self, you can do it. But to me, that's extremely selfish. And I don't think the adepts are going to give you a whole lot of help if they're not convinced that your real goal is to help others. And that's a sincere desire, and not based on personal need, but based on your desire to help and be an instrument of the universe for helping others. There are three types of karma. And this, again, is brought out in the Yoga Sutras. Three types of karma. And they are comprised of the total amount of karma that we have accumulated over numerous lifetimes. So we have a certain amount of karma that our higher self is kind of saddled with. We have also a specific amount and type of karma that we are expected to rebalance during this particular lifetime. And we have the karma that we generate during this lifetime. At the beginning of this particular lifetime, not only is the extent in number of years more or less fixed, it's not exact, but it's at least a fairly set existence of a certain number of years. But there's an amount of karma that you are expected to rebalance during this lifetime. Some people do a very good job of it and actually are able to take on a little bit more than what they expected. Many people don't even get that amount done, and in fact add so much more to it that their total karma now is this big instead of this big. So it's up to us. It's up to us whether or not we're going to try to get as much of our karma out of the way, or whether we're just going to say, oh, you know, hopefully there's a karma eraser out there somewhere and I can just get rid of it and it'll be gone. Well, I don't believe in any kind of karma eraser. If it works, it works, but I kind of like the idea that I'm responsible for everything that I've created. And that I have to, if I created it, then I need to rebalance it and get it in sync with the universal law. And that's how I learned. That's my experience. If someone were able to just eliminate all the mistakes I made, I would get nowhere. I need that. Give me back my karma. Give me back my karma. I can't let that go. That's what teaches us how to get to the point of developing, of being an adept. Once we achieve that level, we actually are we have passed the human kingdom. Every kingdom has a certain degree of consciousness that indicates the graduation point for that kingdom. When our consciousness was in the animal kingdom, once it attained a certain level, then it was ready to go into the human kingdom. And again, in the human kingdom, once we attain that level, we now, among other things, can choose to become an adept too. If we're willing to sacrifice and come back and teach others, and it's an enormous sacrifice for them to do that. It's an enormous sacrifice. But if we're willing to be one of them, then we also will be able to help and bless humanity. There are 5 moral qualities required. Again, from the Yoga Sutras. 5 moral qualities. Let's go over them real quickly, then we'll ask any questions that people have, and then we'll let you go. These qualities are ahimsa, and most of us know that term, but it doesn't just mean harmlessness. It means that you have, through different practices and through expanding your consciousness, achieved a degree of awareness of the oneness of all. Not just theoretically, but actually having experienced it during meditation. A oneness with all. And once you have that, there is not even any temptation to do any harm to any other creature. Not even a temptation. So, ahimsa. Second is satya, the strict avoidance of exaggeration, equivocation, pretense, and similar faults. So it's not just the matter of not telling a lie, it's strict ethics. In fact, HPB said that Theosophy is nothing but the strictest ethics. It is pure ethics. And it is these ethics that lead to the yogic life. So, all exaggeration, anything that is not entirely accurate, or anything that is not 100% ethical, The third one is asteya, which is abstaining from stealing. But again, if you've developed ahimsa, this oneness with all, then you wouldn't even be tempted to steal because you're stealing from yourself. The person said, "Oh, how nice of you to give the money to that beggar." And he says, "Nice." He said, "I was only giving it to myself." There's nothing nice about it. We're all one. You can't. If you're stealing from somebody else, you're stealing from yourself. And here's the big one: brahmacharya. Brahmacharya. How many of you know that term? Oh, okay, goodness. All right, a few. Brahmacharya. He says the Eastern student knows that the real yogic life cannot be combined with the self-indulgence and waste of vital force, which is involved in the pleasures of sex. And he has to choose between the two. He may not be required, at least there's a little bit of leeway here. He may not be required to give up sex all at once, but he has to give it up completely before he can start the serious practice of higher yoga as distinguished from mere theoretical study, or even yogic practices of a preparatory nature. Brahmacharya is not only abstinence from sexual indulgence, but freedom from craving for all kinds of sensual enjoyments. The pursuit of sensual pleasures is so much a part of our life, and we depend to such an extent on them for our happiness, that it is considered quite natural and blameless for anybody to indulge in these enjoyments within the limits of moderation and social obligations. But for the would-be yogi, these seemingly innocent enjoyments are harmful, not because there's anything sinful about them, but because they carry with them the potential for constant mental and emotional disturbance. Austerity is thus a necessary part of the yogic discipline. Now, we won't go any farther into that, except just to let you know that all of these requirements require a very long period of time to implement. Don't beat yourself up if you can't do everything completely right all at once. In fact, if you beat yourself up, all you're doing is delaying your progress. There's no, you wouldn't beat somebody else up because they weren't able to live up to their highest potential. Why would you beat yourself up? So be kind to yourself as well. Give yourself a little bit of leeway. If you fall, recognize it, get up, and just keep going again. The next one is apigraha, and that is non-possessiveness. The tendency to accumulate worldly goods is so strong that it may be considered almost a basic instinct in life. We all accumulate stuff, don't we? Not just possessions, but ideas, emotional fixations. We get attached to all kinds of things, including people. How do we learn non-attachment to people? Well, in the long run, we learn non-attachment to people by raising our consciousness, and over a period of time we do it, to the point that we are in tune at the level of our higher selves. That can never be broken. There's not death, there's not anything, not the separation in space. Nothing can break that connection with a person that you love, ever. So once you achieve some degree of consciousness at the higher level, there's no fear. There is no loss, ever. Yes, we do get attached to the personality. Let's recognize it. We all do. But we can also learn to not be completely attached to it and let it go more quickly. So I'm hoping that this gave you a few insights into what the true science of yoga is about, what is required if you intend to gain the highest level of samadhi And I failed to mention, there are 7 different levels. Even once you get into the levels of samadhi, there are 7 different levels that you have to achieve. For us humans, it takes several lifetimes, and we struggle just to get a little bit of consciousness going on between us and our higher self. With the adept, who has far more experience than we do, it is simply a matter of changing the focus. Just like I can change focus from something in front of me to that image on the back wall in a split second, they can do the same thing with their levels of consciousness when they choose to. Just that simple. Now, I want to see if there's anything that I didn't cover. I mean, there's plenty of things I didn't cover, but is there anything that is just you need to discuss that would help you in your pursuits right now?
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
So, these 5 moral codes, were they written by HPB?
No. That's part of the aphorisms. Patanjali, the original aphorisms of Patanjali.
Oh, this writer that you spoke earlier about, he spoke about science and yoga? No.
Yeah, the book, The Science.
Yes, the
Okay.
Science of Yoga is a commentary on the aphorisms, but those 5 qualities are in the original Yoga Sutras.
Okay, which he translated?
Yes.
Okay. So they weren't written by HPB?
No.
Okay. Because, okay. So then I had another question about, I found interesting when you spoke about the elimination of the personal I,
Mhm.
which is, which are our vices and desires and all that, right?
Well, it's our personality. It's our attachment to this lower self.
Yeah.
That's the personal I.
So how do you, get to the elimination?
Well, that's through the Viveka and the Vairagya. Learning non-reaction,
Okay,
non-attachment, and non-judgment. If you practice those 3 on a daily basis, you will have achieved a tremendous amount towards that.
okay, because I didn't, it wasn't very clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions before we finalize? One last one.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm an actor and a teacher in the city, and I'm familiar with Theosophy. And I had a lot of peace being here and listening to you. It reminded me of what you were talking about with other people and feeling that oneness or communication, so thank you for that. In everything from how I teach my actors to something I do where I read the Bible at churches or even on TV on the ABC Family Channel. One of my particular Bible reads I have to read on Sunday. To my studying of EBT, emotional brain training, that helps me with some old post-trauma issues. What you're talking about is very relative in many ways and very peaceful to me. Maybe it's a little different than some of my Christian beliefs, but it still is very harmonious. What would be the next step to just keep in touch with what you've delivered tonight? Is it one particular book, or because I want to be mindful of what you talked about tonight, but I want to continue on.
All right. Let me explain quickly that our purpose in writing this book came about because Paul...
I came late, I didn't realize you had a book, forgive me.
Paul and I taught a class which was on Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. He introduced me to Eckhart Tolle. I had heard of him, but I had never read anything of his. And 3 or 4 years ago, he gave me a copy of the book. We decided 2 years ago to teach a class on it. But we wanted to combine his teachings with Theosophy because we felt that together they formed a complementary combination. So we did. We taught this class for 11 months, and it was incredible. People loved it. And to me, it was the practical side, the psychology that Eckhart Tolle talks about, and getting rid of the ego. He talks constantly about the need to get rid of the ego. And Theosophy, which has all of the theory, has all of the information that is required to do that. Once you combine those two, you've got a perfect product, we think. So we incorporated those teachings in this book, and Lynn's gonna she'll tell you about. Once we end, we will pass out to everybody a copy of HPB's writing and just a little bookmark that you can keep as a souvenir to do whatever you want with. But I want to just thank all of you for your attention tonight.
Can I add something before you wrap up?
Yes.
I wanted to add something to what you were saying over there, how do we get rid of the personality? That sounds really harsh.
No, I meant the personal I.
Oh, no. I know, I'm just saying that we're saying to get rid of, to strip away. And even last night, one of our friends had quoted someone, let's see, what did John say? There was a quote about, imagine putting your foot on the neck of the personality, don't really, I mean, it sounds kind of harsh what we're saying. First, I wanted to say in my own words why that's even necessary. If you're not familiar with Eckhart Tolle, his book, A New Earth, is amazing, and he describes why the ego is such a hindrance to our spiritual progress. He gives a very, very, very good explanation as to why that is. It's almost like every man out for themselves, out for himself or herself. When we operate from our personality, from our ego, we're kind of like, hey, I'm going to be better because I'm me. This is me, and I deserve this, and I'm not going to be a victim. Don't you try to make me into a victim, and I'm going to succeed and win, and therefore you're going to lose, and that's all that matters. That's not a worldview that's conscientious, and that's not a theosophical worldview by any stretch. When you release your operation through the ego and through the personality, you understand our connection to all of the human race and to every living thing and all things that are in existence in the cosmos. When you realize that there is no separation at the core of every human, every living being, and everything, then you naturally operate not through ego and through the personality. And there are all kinds of clues and hints on how to do that. So you ask specifically, how do you do that? So many things. Meditation is the main thing. But our book has lots of hints and tricks. Eckhart Tolle has the three main ones Terry said: non-attachment, non-judgment, non-reaction. Just the simple fact of not getting mad when a driver cuts you off or when someone honks their horn, just not getting angry. Okay, that's one little thing. Learning how to focus on your breath so you can be at peace and so you can contemplate a flower and not have to worry about, oh my gosh, I got to catch this train so I can go make dinner or date or something. There are lots and lots of little things to do, but it's important to know why we're trying to do that first, and it's not that we're trying to get rid of our personality so we operate as a monotone piece of machinery or a Spock, like Terry said. The masters themselves have beautiful personalities, but it's the motivation and the intention as to how they act and how they operate, why they do things, and if they do get frustrated, how long do they carry that frustration with them. So I just wanted to share that because I felt like we might need it.
Can I just
Yes.
say something? Because it helped me, and this goes to what you said. The way I see it, when I was trying to suppress, I wasn't successful with it because then my inner child was rebelling. So I found that instead of suppressing or eliminating, I look at it as transforming that energy into something else. Because energy would always exist, and I find suppressing would never work for me. But I would take that effort, I would take that feeling, I would take that energy and transform it into something positive, and try to see the positive in it. And that's the point of what you said, that the masters had personality. It's
Yes.
just beautiful. So it was transformed into just see as much as possible in beauty and positive, and try to as little as possible the negative.
I don't think suppressing is ever the way.
Never-
We definitely need to
exactly.
acknowledge what's there and
Yes.
allow it to be.
Right.
Yeah, I think the problem is, as Terry pointed out, words can be misleading, and as my good philologist friend John Eljo said, every word is ambiguous.
That's true.
Um,
That's true.
It's not, from my point of view, destroying the personality, because the adepts have very, very definite personalities. You read the Mahatma letters and you see a big difference in the personality between Maurya and Kutumi. So it's not destroying the personality. To me, it is destroying the identification with that process of thinking and feeling that we call me. In my own book, The Secret Gateway, I have a chapter, Remember Who You Are. and it deals with the inner principles. And then the next chapter is on the ego, and it begins with that little verse that I think his name was Mears wrote. Yesterday, as I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd stay away. And the very next line is, the man on the stair is the personal ego. He is both there and not there. So it gives you a sense of what this ego is. And for on my own personal path, whatever one wants to call it, and I don't think I have a goal, if you wish to know the truth. I never thought of it in terms of goals. But it's always been to try to understand what in the hell am I doing here? What is going on? I've had that passionate desire since I was 4 years old. Again, words, passion. Too many passions can destroy the life. I mean, it's mentioned in the Mahatma letters. Yet, what did he mean by passion? He didn't mean no emotion. My God, he has some very passionate statements he makes in those letters. But he's not identified with it as you and I are. At least that's what he seems to say. So it's not destroying anything. It's realizing more and more and more who you really are. And then the mechanism, the mind, the emotions, the body, begin to react in harmony with who you really are. And as he pointed out, and as the literature points out, this takes many lifetimes. And he's stressed rightly that it's a long, arduous process, but it's also a joyful process, people. It's also a joyful process because more and more and more that inner life comes to fruition. And we realize more and more and more who we really are, and life becomes not more difficult. More problems, yes, but more strength to overcome the problems as well. So, you know, the Christians say, God never gives you a cross heavier than you can bear. And I think that's a theosophical statement as well. Each one has the cross that he can bear. But it's a joyful process also, so I want to stress that side.
I mean, I don't see the personality as something harmful. Because I see
It's
it
not
more as a
harmful,
vehicle
and he
to
points out
interact.
there's nothing sinful about anything that we do. It's just that if this happens to be your goal, then you've got to do some very specific things. And like Ed says, disidentify with the needs of this personality. The emotional needs really have to go away. There are a lot of emotionally needy people in the world. But the adepts are not emotionally needy. I can guarantee that they don't have these personal emotional needs that most of us still have. They still have emotions, they still have personalities, but you just have to, I can't explain it in 5 seconds or 5 minutes even, but I can tell you that they have eliminated this personal emotional need that most people find so essential in their lives. I know there are some people that do need to get going, so let's end our session, and then if some of you would like to chat together, that would be very nice. And be sure to remember to get a copy of this. Lynn, do you have any last minute? There's no need for applause or anything, please. Any other last minute?
If anybody's interested in the book, we have it in the bookshop, and even though the lights are off, you can come in and make a purchase if you'd like.
Sure. All right, thank you again, all of you, for your attendance and for welcoming us to New York City.
Thank you.
Is that the copy of this?